What's your, "'tis but a scratch," moment?
Fell off my bike and into some wet gravel when I was 8, no big deal, scraped my knee and got soaked, played the rest of the day outside and came home for dinner, went to use the bathroom and when I pulled my jeans off I realized I wasn't soaked from the puddle, it was blood. I had sliced a huge gash in my knee and when I pulled my pants down a flap of skin pulled away and it started bleeding again. My first stitches, edit, lovely, my all-time top comment on Reddit is about a skin flap, thanks a bunch.
Back in my baseball days, when I was pitching, I completely lost a pitch, and it beamed a guy in the jaw. He throws his bat down, glares at me with the glariest of glares ever glared, spits out blood, then calmly runs to first base as though nothing happened. It was terrifyingly badass.
I broke my neck on a huge shorebreak wave and didn't want to leave the beach so I continued swimming and playing volleyball until my friends noticed my neck was swelling up bigger than my head.
When I was very young I pulled a tablecloth and managed to dump a freshly boiled pot of tea all over myself. I get rushed to hospital. My skin is red and bubbling. I should be in floods of tears. Instead, I proudly point to my ruined skin and proclaim to the paramedic, I did that, over 30 years later and I still have some scars, but I am definitely no longer that hardcore.
My mate in high school broke my nose in class and the teacher told me to be quiet. I got hit by a car while riding my bicycle, flew through the air, bounced off his windshield breaking his windshield, my helmet and 2 vertebrae, then thrown to the ground where my kneecap shattered and bone was sticking out of the skin, and as I lay there in shock, unaware of how badly I was injured, I thought, I might be able to get back on my bike and ride home.
I broke my toe running up the stairs and I ran back down the stair thinking I just stubbed it until my toe turned purple. I was a kid visiting family in West Virginia and was playing with some other kids which somehow involved me being in a tree. I got a little cut on my hand and was inconsolable, ran to the house for my mom to make it better. She put the smallest of band-aids on it. When I turned around and started walking out of the house she started yelling and I was just looked at her like, what? There was a trail of blood coming from the back of my leg, didn't even notice. My first job was as a butcher and I came into work one day with a raging hangover. I sharpened the knives, they were crap ones that went blunt all the time, and immediately proceeded to cut my finger open. I thought nothing of it, went about my shift, and when I got home to put a proper dressing on it I found out it was as deep as the bone and I wouldn't get feeling back in the end of it for literally years.
Fell off my bike and dislocated my shoulder, popped it back in and kept on going. Trapped a nerve but it's okay 90% of the time now. Another time I fell in some glass, pulled out most of it from my hands and pulled out a piece 9 days after the wound had fully healed. I felt a weird pressure when I'd hold things so I had to feel around and cut the glass out. I walked under a pine tree barefoot and stepped on something that mildly hurt. Went back inside and was cleaning my bathroom when I looked in the mirror and saw whole bloody footprints covering the floor behind me in a line down the hall. For a minute I thought I was being haunted or something.
Not me but my teacher. She said that one time when she was in college she was in a classroom and her foot was stuck on something but she just yanked back and was fine, but she was looking up the whole time. She got to her dorm and took of her shoe and it was soaked in blood and her foot was stabbed by a loose piece of metal.
I broke my arm at the skating rink, and skated for an hour before I even left. Then, after I left there, I went to a playground with my boyfriend at the time and hung out. I didn't go to the hospital until the next day. Got blackout drunk while camping and fell hands first onto the grate that had been over the fire for hours. My wife and friends were all freaking out thinking I definitely had third-degree burns. I came out of my blackout in the bathroom with all of them trying to wash my hands in cold water. When all the soot came off, I was somehow completely unharmed. Since then I've been known as the unburned.
Separated 2 ribs when I slipped going up a staircase. I went down to radiology at work and got an X-ray. Looked at it and said okay no breaks and just walked over to the and got 2 big rolls of ACE bandages. Went back to my desk and took off my shirt and t-shirt. Boss walks in and sees the bruises on my chest. Then I said no biggie just don't make me laugh, told him what happened, wrapped myself up and went on with life.
Broke my tailbone and didn't know for 6 months. Edit, to answer some questions, found out when I got an X-ray. I've always had moderate back pain, but I also have a high pain tolerance. It's the only bone I've ever broken. I was 14 I think. It was freshman year of high school. Some of y'all need Jesus.
When I was a small dumbass child, I had a habit of gripping door frames when walking through the door. I did not discriminate between the latch side or the hinge side. Door gets closed and my fingers get crushed in the hinge, to the point where there's a dark purple line across them and a tangible groove. My mom starts completely freaking out over the injury, but I, brave little dumbass I was, saw the distress she was in at what had happened. I put on my bravest face, my eyes welling up in tears from the pain, and said, "Don't worry mommy, it'll heal." I was right, it did, but still. Edit, good lord my inbox. Thanks for the guilds guys, I'm glad you enjoyed my story.
My little sister fell down about 15 steps at our grandma's house when she was a toddler. She got up, giggled and went to go eat some snacks. This other time, still a toddler, she was supposed to be napping. We were in the living room and heard a huge thud. We ran to the room thinking she'd fell out of the bed. Nope, she somehow managed to pull the TV down. This was the early 2000s, TVs were heavy AF, and it fell on top of her. She was laying there in snow angel position and my mom freaked out. When we got the TV off her, she got up and asked for ice. Not to soothe pain but to eat. My little sister was and still is a champ.
A couple weeks ago, I stepped on an ant hill and got a bunch of ant bites on my ankles. 3 to 4 days later, the itching was unbearable. I wasn't sleeping, my legs were swollen, and no amount of Benadryl or antihistamine cream was helping the itching. I finally went to a clinic to get a shot or whatever, because I clearly having some sort of allergic reaction. It was a staph infection that had spread from my ankles up to my knees. I would have died if this 1920 instead of 2020. I was on antibiotics for 10 days, and now several weeks later, the dead skin from the infection is still flaking off. Too long did not read. Scratched ant bites with unclean hands and gave myself a staph infection. Ignored it for several days because it was just some bug bites. I got into a car accident and showed up to practice an hour or so later.
When I fell through a window and cut my stomach open, my colon and stomach both fell out of my body while I caught and looked up at my friends bleeding out. Was in shock, but alas, 'tis but a scratch. Still here today, hooray.
Absolutely shattered my wrist. Pulverized a couple carpals into dust. Fractured my scaphoid bone and flipped it 180 degrees. Spent 2 days trying to convince myself it was but a simple sprain. When I finally went to a doctor they rushed me into emergency surgery. Later found out the doctors couldn't believe I wasn't incapacitated by pain. Whoops.
When I was younger, like really young, I had escaped from the house and at the time my dad was just about to drive to work. I had managed to get just behind the wheel of the car and got ran over, got rushed to hospital and at around midnight parents got a call from hospital because I was running around the place like a lunatic waking all the other kids up and basically I got away with a car tire mark and that's it. TLDR, I was a super baby who got ran over and didn't break a single thing.
Broke wrist while snowboarding. Stuffed some snow in my glove and did a couple more runs.
I ran into the top of a door frame, did the whole cartoon head outside. Legs flying inside and then falling on my back. Head hurt a tiny bit so I covered my forehead with my hand with some pressure for a minute. When I removed my hand and tried to get up, my friends who were crowded over me collectively gasped. Turns out I had split my forehead skin open and they could see the bone. I literally wouldn't have known if they hadn't been so freaked out. Couldn't feel a thing. Got 5 stitches and a small scar near my hairline.
A field arrow went through part of my thumb.
I actually got stabbed one time in my lower thigh, walked to the hospital with my coat covering it 'cause I didn't wanna freak out any kids, all thanks to the wonderful thing called alcohol, stung like a bitch the next day though. When I was 6, I badly bruised my arm when performing cartwheels and backflips and at first when I fell it was no big deal until my arm was swollen and I couldn't bend it, had to wear a cast for a few weeks.
When I was a child I was pretty stupid so I was playing, Don't Let the Paper Touch the Ground. It's where you just keep hitting a piece of paper in the air. Then I ran into my kitchen while playing and smashed my head onto the corner of a table and it was gushing blood. I didn't even notice my head cut open right in the middle of both my eyes. I'm very lucky I still have vision, and I only realized my head was cut open when my sister looked at me and just started screaming her vocal cords out.
I was playing football, soccer, and twisted my ankle. Had to stop but managed to walk to the coach to get home. Walked from the coach stop to my house about 1.5 miles and went to sleep. Woke up the next day and my ankle was the size of a grapefruit and had to call an ambulance due to quite severe pain. The medical examiner assumed my ankle was crushed by a very heavy object as I had fractured 5 bones, broke my leg and had extensive cartilage, ligament damage. I have been told now that I will never heal to 100% again. 3 years later and I still have pain and my foot goes numb all the time. This is 2 weeks after when my first cast was removed.
Had a piece of an air chisel break off about the size of a BB, and insert itself into my hand. I had thick latex gloves on. Thought it just hit me and bounced off. Wasn't until I realized my hand was really wet and my glove was sloshing that I noticed it was full of blood.
A slab of glass shattered and fell on me and my mom. I checked Mum for any injuries and went to clean up the mess, which was promptly followed by my mother screaming and flipping her shit. Apparently I had left a trail of blood around the house because the glass left a deep gash on my foot. She even scolded me because I was laughing at the whole situation. Fun times.
When I was a teenager I got jumped by a hoodlum trying to mug me. I was just walking along and they snuck up behind me and cracked me in the spine with an iron bar. Somehow the blow, instead of being painful, just went completely numb. So I turned around and said, "What the fuck was that?" I'll never forget the look of fear on the guy's face. He just dropped the bar and ran. Still get a weird numb spot on my back from time to time.
I don't know how much this counts because it wasn't due to an injury. After spending a summer doing food truck events, I was gaining some weight. I figured I just got fat from eating too much junk at the events, so I started dieting and running 3 to 4 times a week. But the fat wasn't going anywhere. I saw the doctor a couple months later, and it turns out it was an 8.5 ovarian cyst over my abdomen. Not fat. Oops. Edit. Pounds. Sorry for not including this crucial metric, hahaha.
Rolled my car. Got out of the car bewildered and in shock, noticing a kink in my neck. As someone who constantly cracks my knuckles back neck, my instinct was just, I'm not hurt. Thank God. Just need to crack my neck and I'll be fine. Before I finished processing that train of thought I was held down in C-spine by the person behind me who had watched my crash. Luckily he was an off-duty firefighter. I had broken 3 vertebrae in my neck. I just couldn't tell it yet from the adrenaline and shock. Required full surgery to fuse together with bone from my hip and plates, screws. Had there not been someone behind me and had I proceeded with my tease but a scratch instincts, I'd be paralyzed or dead.
I was at my daughter's wedding reception and was alarmed at how irritable I was, also how much trouble I had keeping up with conversations. When we got home, I realized I was running a 100+ fever. This was a couple of years ago, so, no, I didn't expose anyone to COVID. Broke my toe on my birthday, hurt like hell but didn't want to ruin the day. I was hanging around with friends at my place, so I just went with it.
Once I was in an urgent care for some random reason, and the only other person in the waiting room was a man who had a massive gash in the head and his thumb was seriously dislocated and swollen. By the extent of his injuries, he definitely should have been at an ER instead. Anyways, we both had been waiting a long time to be seen, and he got up, approached the administrator and said, "Hey, I really need to get checked out soon. My dog hasn't gone outside in a while." This man had blood running down his face, a dislocated thumb, and his biggest concern was getting home to see his dog.
I was so sick and weak from pleurisy that I lost the ability to tense up in a protective manner when coughing. During one especially severe coughing fit, I coughed so hard that one of my discs slipped and splintered into my spinal cord, rendering me paralyzed from the waist down. The pain caused me to see white and lose consciousness. I was able to eventually walk with the use of a walker, although with much struggling, screaming and begging God for help, but during my surgery 14 months later, my neurosurgeon removed bone from my spinal cord that had embedded itself when my disc crumbled. Painful bone splinters punctured my spinal cord and caused me to question if life was worth living for over a year.
Playing football, 7th grade, no pads or anything, kid gets tackled, he hops up and punches someone right on the eye socket, instant big welt, not, the kid, who got punched, gets up, literally says, "'Tis but a scratch," and left. It was kind of hilarious because you know it hurt a lot. Everyone calmed down and we called it a day. I think testosterone is a helluva drug.
I got the roof to clear the gutter and was coming down when the ladder slipped from under me. A hospital trip later and I have 3 cracked ribs and my right elbow is sprained. Did I mention it was Mother's Day?
One of our gun trucks in my platoon detonated an IED on a dirt road in Iraq. Luckily the detonation was premature, and it took off the front end of the vehicle, leaving the crew shaken but fine. The crater was massive. We deployed the rest of the platoon to secure the area and recover the vehicle. About an hour had passed. Stupid me decided to have a look into crater, and as soon as I peered over the edge, a secondary IED detonated, throwing up a massive plume of smoke, dust and debris. I fell back, and started checking my body for damage and injury, but I was fine. Covered in a thick coat of dust and dirt, but otherwise fine. Just really fucking angry at myself, and quite embarrassed.
Riding my bike. Got hit by a car. The driver of the car behind the guy that hit me got out and ran up to me telling me she was going to call the paramedics. To stay still. Help is coming. I got up, told the guy who hit me. Dude never even got out of his car. Only rolled down the window a few inches to watch what he's doing and be more careful in the future. Thanked the lady who was trying to help, but looked over my bike, and since it was still rideable, continued on my way. I later found out I broke my leg.
When I was in kindergarten, my friends were attempting to climb a gate, and one of the metal wires were sticking out. I fell, and the wire cut from right above my ankle to my knee. I think my reaction was, "Oh look, blood."
I managed to break both of my front teeth while getting off a ski lift once. 5 minutes later I, being terrible at snowboarding, went straight through a barrier and into a tree going at full speed, which resulted in 4 broken ribs. I was in a different country, so just soldiered on for another week of vacation, continuing to snowboard through the pain and crashing several more times. Didn't even realize I'd broken my ribs until I had an X-ray when I got back.
I stubbed my toe on a knife blade and it chopped off a good chunk. Gardening, am I right? Person shrugging.
I broke my collarbone early in the day snowboarding and continued the rest of the day. After I got home I saw how bruised and swollen it was.
I broke my collarbone at 6 and didn't know until 6 months later at a doctor's appointment when they were concerned about it healing without it being set properly. I was going up the slide when a kid went down, so yeah. Did something nasty to my leg during a taekwondo match and still won with my ankle swelling. I flipped a four-wheeler and dislocated my wrist. I said I was fine. I wasn't.